I woke up to the sound of
What is the
generators and
meaning of this,
music
Karen?
way too early for anyone to be
Honestly,
hosting a party
Daniel,
on my
I
land.
thought you'd never
But when I
ask.
stepped outside, I
Oh,
froze.
please.
Karen Whitmore, the HOA president, was
We've
holding a
gotta move this
full-blown
stuff.
wedding on my
I
pasture.
told you this would
White
happen.
tents, flowers everywhere,
We had
and
a
her barking
deal.
orders like she owned the place. When I confronted her, she just laughed and said, "Relax, it's community property now. Community property. You just messed with the wrong farmer. You'll see what happens when someone crosses a line like that. Trust me, this isn't going to end the way she thinks." Karen Whitmore wasn't just the president of the Maplewood Heights HOA, she was the queen of her own little kingdom. The first time I met her, she drove up to my fence in her spotless white SUV, lowered her sunglasses and asked, "Are you aware your cows are visible from our cul-de-sac? Some of our residents find that unpleasant." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. From that day on, Karen became the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood aesthetics. She filed complaint after complaint, the smell of manure, the noise from my tractor, even the rooster that dared to crow at sunrise. My barn, which had been standing since my grandfather built it in 1948, was labeled an eyesore. "It lowers property values," she said. I told her, "This barn was here before your subdivision even had plumbing." But Karen didn't care. She wasn't used to hearing no. Every HOA meeting turned into her personal stage to lecture neighbors about lawn heights, mailbox, colors, and even what flowers to plant. Some neighbors agreed with me, but they were too scared to speak up. Karen thrived on control. The HOA gave her just enough power to act like she could boss around the entire county. And me, I was just a nuisance to her little vision of a perfect neighborhood. But that vision was about to shatter one wedding at a time. Karen's behavior had started small, almost comical at first, but over time, it escalated into something more oppressive. It began with the usual complaints, my cows being too visible, the manure smell drifting into the air, the rooster that crowed at dawn. "Some of our residents find that unpleasant," she would always say, as if I owed her some apology for living on my own land. But I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. Still, she wasn't going to let it slide. I started getting these passive-aggressive letters printed on Maplewood Heights HOA letterhead, demanding things like keeping my cows inside the fence for aesthetic reasons and limiting the odor of manure within acceptable community standards. They were always framed as friendly reminders, but they were anything but. I had framed the first one as a joke, hung it up in the barn, and took it with me every time I went to feed the cows. But something about Karen's smile, whenever I saw her, the way she talked down to me like I was some ignorant farmer, started to rub me the wrong way. I was a patient man, but everyone has their limits. Karen had managed to rile up the new neighbors too, the ones who were city folk trying to pretend they were living the country dream. One of them had once said, "I really hate the way your cows look in the pasture. It's so rural." I smiled and waved, but in the back of my mind, I was stewing. These people had no idea what it meant to live on land like this, and here they were, trying to tell me how to farm my own fields. The worst part, Karen was right behind them, egging them on, making them believe they had the right to control everything around them, even my cows. A few weeks before the wedding incident, I noticed something strange. Survey flags had appeared near the edge of my north pasture. Neon orange stakes lined up in perfect rows like some kind of construction project. I walked out to check what was going on, thinking maybe the county was expanding the road, but instead I found two men with clipboards marking measurements in my field. "Morning," I called, but they jumped when they saw me. "What's all this for?" I asked. One of them stammered, "We're with Maplewood Heights Event Committee, just assessing the field for an upcoming community celebration." I laughed. It was the same laugh I had given Karen months ago when she first started with her ridiculous complaints. "This field belongs to me, not your HOA," I said, tapping my boot against the ground for emphasis. They looked at each other, then packed up in a hurry. As I walked back to the barn, I felt my blood start to boil. Karen had no right to extend the HOA's control beyond its borders. But as far as she was concerned, my land didn't matter. If it served her little vision of community, it was fair game. A few days later, I ran into Karen while getting the mail at the end of my driveway. She was standing there with that tight smile of hers, holding a latte like she was the queen of the world. "Daniel," she said in that overly sweet voice, "we're planning a little celebration soon. My daughter's wedding. We'd love to have it out here. You know, with the rustic charm of hay bales, wide open, fields, just perfect, don't you think?" I stared at her incredulous. "I don't rent out my land, Karen. Never have, never will." She let out a soft laugh, but it didn't sound amused. "Come on, Daniel. It's for the community. Everyone benefits from events like this. Think about it, you'll get to be a part of something great." I wasn't having it. "You're not listening. This is private property, not a community park." Her smile faltered, and that's when I knew she was angry. "You're not being very neighborly, Daniel. You should be proud to help out. I was done being polite. I don't need your help, or anyone else's. Keep your wedding off my land. The conversation ended there, but I could feel the storm brewing. Karen didn't know how to take no for an answer, and I knew this wasn't the last time she'd try something like this. It wasn't long after that, when the first signs of trouble came in, I started seeing delivery trucks rolling up my gravel road. At first, I thought maybe one of my neighbors was throwing a party or had hired a contractor, but when I walked out to see who it was, I found workers setting up tents, tables, and lights in the middle of my pasture. They had even run power cables through my fence posts. I walked over to a young guy with a clipboard, but he stopped me before I could say anything. "Sir, please step back. We're on a tight schedule," he said, as if he had any authority over me. "Whose schedule?" I asked, crossing my arms. "I don't recall renting out my farm." The guy blinked. Mrs. Whitmore told us this area was community approved. We have a permit." I laughed, a real full-belly laugh. "A permit from your HOA doesn't mean anything outside their boundary." I reached for my phone. "Show me the permit." He fumbled through his papers, finally pulling out a half-baked authorization document that looked more like a grocery list than any official permit. "Here's the event authorization. Maplewood Heights HOA, signed by President Karen Whitmore." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing in his face. "You realize you're trespassing, right? You don't have permission from me." The guy didn't know what to say, so I pushed past him and walked toward Karen, who was casually strolling through my field like it was her own backyard. "Karen," I shouted, getting her attention. "What part of private property do you not understand?" She turned and smiled, that fake, all-too-familiar smile. "Oh, Daniel, relax. It's community property now. We even mowed part of it for you. This is a perfect backdrop for my daughter's wedding. Don't you think I felt my blood pressure spike? It's not community property, Karen. It's mine. And I want you off my land." Now, she said, waving me off like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "It's just one day. Relax. We're doing something nice here." "Nice," I stared at her, barely able to contain my rage. "Get off my land. Now." She ignored me, turning her back and speaking to the workers. "Ignore him. He's bluffing." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just another annoying Karen incident. This was an all-out battle over what was mine, and if she thought she could get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. By that evening, the sun was setting over my field, now covered with tents, tables, and flowers. I sat on the porch sipping coffee and watching the workers pack up for the night. They had no idea what they had just triggered. Karen thought she could just walk all over me, but I had something in mind that would make her regret every step she took on my land. It wasn't going to be a shouting match or a petty argument. This was going to be something poetic, something Karen would never forget. The next morning, that field wouldn't smell like roses or champagne. It was going to smell exactly like what Karen had been pretending to ignore: cow manure. And it was going to be fresh, warm, and oh so satisfying. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early, before the sun had even fully crept over the horizon. The air was cool, crisp, and quiet, just like every morning on the farm. But today, it wasn't just any morning. Today, I was going to make Karen Whitmore regret ever stepping foot on my land. I climbed into my John Deere tractor, the one that had been in the family for generations, and hit the ignition. The low rumble of the engine felt like a promise that I wasn't just some quiet farmer anymore. This time, I was going to teach Karen a lesson she'd never forget. By 7:00 a.m., the first of the luxury cars rolled down the gravel road, pulling up near my fence. Guests poured out in their pastel suits and glittering dresses, oblivious to what was about to happen. They tottered across my pasture in high heels, complaining about the mud they were creating themselves. I could already hear Karen barking orders from the other side of the field, probably telling the caterers to get the cake or the florists to fix the arrangements. I didn't care about any of that. My only focus was the field ahead of me, the one that just hours earlier had been pristine, glimmering under the morning sun. Now, it was about to be the stage for something far more fitting. I rolled up slowly to the edge of the wedding site where the fancy white chairs and the flower arch stood waiting. I could see Karen in the distance, her head held high as she supervised the final touches. I pulled the tractor to a stop, lined it up perfectly, and reached for the lever on the manure spreader. The moment I flipped it, I felt the power surge through the machine. The spreader roared to life, and with it justice began to rain down. Thick, wet arcs of manure sprayed across the field, across the pristine white chairs, the expensive tables, the delicate flower arch. The smell hit immediately sharp and pungent, like something straight out of the farm. It was impossible to ignore. The once perfect wedding site was now an absolute disaster. The guests froze. Some of them started gagging, covering their noses. A few of the women stumbled back in their heels, and I could almost hear them thinking, "What is this?" But it didn't matter. Karen was about to learn that I wasn't someone you could just trample on. I drove slowly, methodically, making sure every corner of that space got a generous coating. The manure splattered across everything, over the champagne glasses, the buffet tables, the dance floor. It was poetic, really. They had thought they could turn my land into their playground without so much as a thank you, and now they were going to pay the price for their arrogance. By the time I finished spreading the manure, the field looked like a war zone. Tables, sagged flowers were buried under layers of brown, and the chairs, once so pristine, were now a muddy mess. I shut off the tractor and climbed out, taking a moment to survey the chaos. I couldn't help but grin. It was beautiful. I walked toward the wooden wedding sign that had been placed at the entrance. It stood proudly surrounded by destruction. I grabbed it, wiped the mud off it, and planted it firmly back into the ground. But not before adding a little something of my own, a hand-painted sign beneath it that read, "Private property, trespassers get fertilized." I chuckled to myself, taking a few photos from every angle. I knew I'd need these later, proof of just how far Karen had pushed me. These pictures weren't just for my own satisfaction. They were for the legal battle that was about to unfold. Because once I had the evidence, I was going to make sure Karen knew exactly who she was messing with. The field was quiet now, except for the sound of flies buzzing lazily in the thick air. My work here was done, but I wasn't about to let Karen off the hook that easily. I turned and walked back to the porch, coffee in hand, where I sat down to wait for the storm to hit. It wouldn't be long now. Around 8:30, I heard the familiar rumble of an SUV pulling into my driveway. I glanced up, and there she was, Karen, looking every bit the part of the diva she'd always believed herself to be. She stepped out of her car in her coral blazer, her face a perfect picture of smug superiority. But that look didn't last long. The second she caught a whiff of the air, her face twisted into something I can only describe as pure horror. She screamed, "Oh my God," clutching her nose as if the air itself was attacking her. The bride and groom stumbled out of the limo looking just as horrified. The groom swore loudly, and the bride started crying, her designer dress brushing against the muck. The guests, too, were in a panic, frantically waving their hands in front of their faces. And there, amidst the chaos, Karen screamed at her workers. "What is this? Who did this?" I raised my hand casually from the porch, giving her a polite wave. "Morning, Karen." She spun toward me, her eyes wild. You animal, you ruined everything." I smiled, taking another sip of coffee. "On the contrary, everything looks very natural, don't you think?" Her jaw dropped as she looked at the mess I had made. "Do you have any idea how much this costs?" she shrieked, her voice rising higher and higher. I smirked. "I'd say about one lawsuit less than you were expecting." Her face flushed bright red, her voice nearly a shriek now. "I'll have you arrested. You've destroyed my wedding." I stood up, walking slowly toward the fence, enjoying every second of it. "Funny, Karen. I thought you were the one who took what wasn't yours. You're the trespasser, remember?" She froze. I pulled out my phone and hit play, letting her own words ring out from the video I'd recorded the day before. "It's community property now," she had said, smirking. "We even mowed part of it for you." The moment her words played back to her, I saw the color drain from her face. The guests, the workers, everyone was watching, and they were all hearing her admit that she had no right to this land. The gig was up. And then, as if on cue, Sheriff Don Mallister pulled up his cruiser, rolling slowly into my driveway. He took one look at the scene and raised an eyebrow. "Morning, folks," he said, his voice calm like this was just another regular day. Karen spun toward him. "Sheriff, arrest him. He's destroyed everything." Don sniffed the air and made a face. "Yeah, well, maybe next time you'll ask before setting up a party on private land." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but Don turned to me. "Got the video, Danny." I handed him my phone. He scrolled through the footage, nodding. "Yep, looks like you're in the clear, ma'am," he said to Karen. "I suggest you and your guests pack up before I start writing citations." Karen's face twisted in fury, but she didn't have a leg to stand on. Her reign had ended. By the time the last of the guests had fled the scene, the sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the wreckage. The field that had once been the site of Karen's dream wedding now lay in ruin. White chairs were overturned tables, sagged under the weight of manure, and the flower arch, once pristine, hung limply in the air. The smell of fresh cow manure clung to everything like a twisted trophy. I leaned against the fence, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold. My loyal dog Ranger lay at my feet, tail thumping lazily, as if he knew that this was the perfect end to the day. And you know what? It felt good. It felt like the world had finally come back into balance. No more pretending that Karen could do whatever she wanted. No more silent submission. This was my land, and I had made sure everyone knew it. As I stood there, I heard distant voices, neighbors watching from their windows, no doubt. I wasn't the only one who had been waiting for Karen's empire to crumble. The community that had been so intimidated by her was finally breathing a little easier. Word spread fast in a small town, and soon I could hear murmurs from the other side of the fence. "Did you see what he did?" one of the neighbors whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "I can't believe she actually thought she could get away with that." Another voice chimed in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. Karen's iron grip on the neighborhood had cracked, and I was the one who had brought it down. It wasn't just about the wedding, or the manure, or the legal victory. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. It didn't take long for the legal consequences to follow. The Maplewood Heights HOA board, rattled by the public spectacle, quickly moved to remove Karen from her position as president. I heard about it from my neighbor Jim, who had secretly hated her rule, but was too scared to speak up. That night, the HOA's emergency meeting was anything but ordinary. Word had gotten around, and when they showed the video of Karen claiming my land as community property, the room went dead silent. Jim texted me afterward, "You should have seen it. She tried to play the victim, but the whole room turned on her. She was so humiliated it was like watching a train wreck." I couldn't help but smile when I read that. Karen's days of terrorizing the neighborhood were over. The new president, Mr. Hollis, a retired teacher with a quiet, unassuming demeanor, came by to apologize personally. He even brought me a pie, though I'm pretty sure his wife made it. "Mr. White," he said nervously, "on behalf of the HOA, I just want to apologize for everything that's happened. We've enacted new bylaws to make sure something like this never happens again. We also want to cover the costs for any damages caused by, well, the wedding debacle." I chuckled. "You don't owe me a thing, Mr. Hollis. Consider it fertilizer." He blushed deeply and scurried off, no doubt relieved that he hadn't been asked to sign anything. By the time the dust had settled, peace had returned to the farm. Karen's little empire was in ruins, but my land, it had never looked better. The grass had grown thicker in the spot where the wedding had been set up thanks to the extra nutrients, and I couldn't help but think that maybe nature had a hand in all of this. The viral video was still spreading like wildfire. News stations, social media, even local radio stations were picking up on the story. People called me everything from a hero to a legend. The same folks who had once whispered behind their hands about my eccentric ways were now applauding my actions. I couldn't deny that it felt good, but what really mattered was that the people who had once been too scared to stand up to Karen were finally speaking out, taking their power back. Then 2 days later, I got a thick envelope in the mail. I was expecting another legal threat from Karen, but when I opened it, I found something unexpected, a notice from the HOA. It wasn't for me. It was for Karen. The board had voted to remove her as president for misuse of community resources and public embarrassment. They even imposed a fine for unauthorized use of property. I pinned it up next to the letter she had once sent me, demanding I comply with her ridiculous community standards. It seemed fitting, a symbol of the power that had shifted in the neighborhood. As time went on, things only got quieter in a good way. The Maplewood Heights HOA had learned its lesson, and the board actually started doing good things for the community, things like hosting a farmer's market and building a community garden. A far cry from Karen's reign of terror, but the real cherry on top came one afternoon when I was in town. I ran into Karen. She looked different, thinner, her hair shorter, darker. She was loading groceries into her trunk when she saw me. "You think you won, don't you?" she spat. I smiled. "I didn't need to win, Karen. I just needed you to stop." She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. She slammed the trunk, gunned the engine, and sped off down the road, leaving nothing but dust in her wake. I stood there watching her car disappear, feeling oddly peaceful. Justice, after all, doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground. The next few months brought even more surprises. I started getting letters not from lawyers, but from strangers all over the country. Farmers, homeowners, even city dwellers, all telling me their stories of unjust HOA rules and Karen-like neighbors. One man from Florida wrote, "Our HOA fined me $500 for having an American flag on my porch. I used your story to fight back. Thank you for showing us it's okay to stand up." In the end, it wasn't about the revenge. It wasn't even about the fame. It was about respect, respect for the land, respect for boundaries, and, in a strange way, respect for the power of patience. Because sometimes, standing your ground without shouting or fighting back with anger is the most powerful thing you can do.